Trench Crusade is a setting defined by a war that never ends. Territory is lost and reclaimed each passing day, battle lines fluctuate like gas prices, and the conflict grinds on with no end in sight. But what if, at some point, someone actually emerged victorious? What would that victory even look like? Would New Antioch finally succeed in closing the gates of hell once and for all? Or would the heretic legions complete their crusade and see Rome itself brought to ruin? So in today's episode, we're going to break down each of the 6 major factions, from the Trench Pilgrims all the way to the Court of the Seven-Headed Serpent, examining what they're actually fighting for, what their endgame would look like if they achieved total victory, and just how likely that victory really is. And to make things as interesting as possible, people, if this video gets enough comments, let's say 200 in the first week, I'll do a part 2 covering every sub-faction in the Trench Crusade mythos. So without further ado, folks, let's dolphin dive straight into the cowhole. It's time to crawl through the mud and the murk of Trench Crusade and break down the endgames of every faction. We're starting with New Antioch, the last true stronghold of the faithful in the Holy Land, a fortress city built on the ruins of one that was quite literally erased by a mysterious demonic superweapon. And no, it wasn't the Death Star. After the fall of Jerusalem in 1099 and the opening of the Gate of Hell by some silly Knights Templar, Antioch became the final bastion standing between humanity and the corrupted demonic allies of hell. Constructed through combined effort of the Christian world, funded by mandatory donations, and defended by warriors drawn from dozens of nations. We're talking Poles, Byzantians, Ethiopians, Prussians, pretty much anyone who's willing or unlucky enough to fight the forces of hell. And honestly, can you blame anyone for hesitating? If I'm some random peasant in this world, I'm not volunteering for that.
Cool. Can you give me a sec?
Alan, we are so fucked.
I'd rather go work in the most dangerous mine imaginable than stand on those walls. Because when the enemy is rolling up with demons and death commandos, yeah, I think I'm gonna pass. Like, do you see this guy with a bow made out of his arm? That's my sign to clock out permanently. But those walls really do matter. Because if New Antioch falls, the entire Holy Land collapses with it. And from there, nothing stands between the forces of hell and the rest of Europe and Africa. So New Antioch's main goal is simple in theory compared to the other factions, but nearly impossible in practice. Contain the forces of hell, push them back, and one day reclaim Jerusalem from the heretics. Which is quite a tall task. So what would happen if they actually succeeded? What would the endgame for New Antioch actually look like? And more importantly, how would they even pull it off? For New Antioch to truly win, it would definitely not take 1 or 2 final battles, but a complete 180 reversal of the entire war, since it's currently stuck in the greatest Mexican standoff of all time. The forces of New Antioch would have to go on the offensive in a way they never have before. That means a massive, coordinated global crusade, drawing on the full strength of every European nation and deploying their most elite units, like paladins, observers, or sniper priests, alongside the rapid development of whatever new technologies those European nations can produce. For example, imagine if Britain constructed more of those floating islands of war, mobile fortresses capable of operating on land and sea. With enough of them, New Antioch could take the fight directly to the heretical pirate fleets and support the reconquest of the Holy Land by bombarding the armies of hell with an obscene amount of firepower. Or perhaps having more of those nifty paladins would help change the course of the war, since the official Trench Crusade lore paints them as pretty darn tootin' powerful. They're near perfect communicants, for in their veins flows the purest blood that the Metachrist program had been able to produce. Paladins are warriors with such physical stature and inner holiness that not only can they approach Jerusalem's Valley of Tears, but they can enter the very gates of Inferno and return to tell the tale. Each is said to represent near perfection of human form, both body and mind. though much scarred and burned from the long centuries of war they have endured for the sake of all creation. There are even theories that paladins are clones of Jesus Christ himself. So if that's true, folks, imagine scaling that up. More of them deployed for assassination missions, sabotage operations, and deep strikes into hell, all of which would greatly help the war effort. Even an alliance with the Iron Sultanate would dramatically strengthen New Antioch's chances, especially given the Sultanate's mastery of alchemy, engineering, and innovation. Their weapons and constructs could fill the exact gaps New Antioch struggles with, providing more reliable counters to demonic forces and giving humanity tools that could actually match Hell's unnatural advantages. Combine that with new technologies, maybe even some nuclear level weapons, if humanity could even reach that point, and if there's enough infighting among the heretics, then suddenly New Antioch has a new path forward. They would have the opportunity to push deep into enemy territory, dismantle their strongholds, and systematically collapse the infrastructure of Hell's influence on Earth. To reach their endgame, essentially, New Antioch needs to innovate that excites to the max. What I like to call innovation maxing. I really don't know how else they would be able to breach the stalemate. Without additional reinforcements from empowered humans or highly advanced technologies, they would still be facing the vastly powerful armies of Hell, who have demons, goetic magic, and whatever else Hell can conjure. So if New Antioch can marshal this type of force, a massive host of a collection of all the forces of Europe, supported by various empowered humans like sniper priests, paladins, or observers, all supported by various new advancements in technology, like multiple island fortresses from Britannia, then New Antioch may finally have the chance to push the heretics back. But it would all really come down to if New Antioch could take the center of it all, Jerusalem, and not only take it, but permanently close the gate of hell. To close it, the church would likely need something more than just armies. We're talking about some form of ancient relics, and possibly a once-in-history convergence of faith strong enough to seal the gate permanently. Maybe God would finally intervene on Earth and save humans from damnation.
Every time I try to talk to someone, it's sorry this and forgive me that and I'm not worthy. What are you doing now?
I'm averting my eyes, O Lord.
Well, don't. It's like those miserable psalms. They're so depressing.
If they didn't close the rift, all of their efforts would be for nothing, since Hell could spew forth more corruption, more minions, until ultimately New Antioch would be forced to withdraw, even if it took centuries. So New Antioch needs to close the gate to emerge victorious and trench Crusade. So it may be one of the most difficult objectives in the entire setting, and it would likely cost millions of lives to even attempt it, but if they succeeded, New Antioch would emerge victorious, and it would mean the gate of hell is sealed, Jerusalem and the Holy Lands are reclaimed, and the heretics have been utterly annihilated. So what would the world look like upon the defeat of hell? Well, victory for New Antioch wouldn't exactly look like peace, kumbaya. It would look like the total militarization of the entire world in the name of preventing it from ever happening again. New Antioch would go from a defensive stronghold to the center of a global, theocratic power. The same coalition that rebuilt the city would now unify under a single purpose, enforcing the Christian faith across the world. Crusades would become preemptive campaigns to purge anything even remotely tied to demonic influence. Entire regions could fall under strict religious rule, governed not just by kings or nations, but by doctrine enforced at sword point. And even then, the paranoia of the wars of the past would never fully go away. I could even see New Antioch and the Iron Sultanate going to war, and the conflict in the Holy Land resuming just like it did in actual history. But now both sides have highly advanced technology, and the world suffers as a result. So even if New Antioch emerges victorious, and hell is driven back from the world, wars still occur, battles are still fought, and the grimdark setting of Trench Crusade continues as always. If we're talking about the probability of this occurring, I think it's extremely unlikely. Not because they lack strength, but because their win condition requires several near impossible outcomes aligning at once. We're talking total unity among human factions, which won't happen, sustained logistical dominance across a collapsing world, technology rapidly advancing, which will most likely take centuries at the least, and the successful closing of the Gate of Hell, which is said to drive only the most faithful into madness. So even if they manage to push Hell back significantly, the setting itself strongly implies that the conflict is not meant to fully be resolved, only managed. So realistically speaking, New Antioch's best possible outcome is a long-term containment and regional dominance of Hell's forces, not total and utter victory. And unfortunately, even in a scenario where they do win, like I said, it's likely this isn't the end of war, it's just the beginning of a new one. So although New Antioch may reach their endgame, it still entails fighting it out with another faction, one we're about to address next, the Iron Sultanate. The Iron Sultanate is another one of the largest faithful powers in the Middle East, and one of the most heavily fortified nations in the entire world. As when the Gate of Hell was opened, and their forces were unleashed upon the world, the Sultanate had a giant-ass wall to hide behind that would put the giant ice wall in the Game of Thrones to shame. Every day, the forces of Hell attack this wall, and every day they are driven back, but casualties continue to grow. But within its borders, the Sultanate thrives. Its city is rich with knowledge, its mosques filled with prayer, and its house of wisdom preserving lost sciences and forging weapons that blur the line between faith and alchemy. This results in the Iron Sultanate being one of the stronger factions in the setting, as the roster has a diverse array of forces that can combat the demons of Hell. You have Azeb's fast-moving skirmishers trained in deception, the Janissaries' elite shock infantry, the Lions of Jabir, mobile hunters who harass enemy flanks, and standing behind all of them is the House of Wisdom. They produce alchemical weapons, mechanical constructs, and battlefield innovations that push the limits of what war can even be. For example, the Brazen Bull, which is a combination of a giant bull who wields a cannon larger than its own body, is able to rip apart demons with no difficulty. So while New Antioch's goal is to hold the line and ultimately defeat Hell, what does the Iron Sultanate's endgame actually look like? Is it just holding the wall, or do they intend to take the fight to the heretics as well? The answer is somewhere in between. Like New Antioch, they value survival, preservation, and the destruction of Hell's forces. But the Iron Sultanate has something New Antioch doesn't have. You know, a giant fucking wall that is nigh unbreachable and created by God. Yeah, I'd love to see the Pope pull that out of his ass. Their endgame kinda mirrors New Antioch in principle, but differs in execution. They seek to defend and preserve their sanctuary, while ultimately destroying the forces of Hell, without abandoning their precious iron wall. The Iron Sultanate is in a unique position because they don't need to conquer to win, they just need to outlast Hell. But what would that actually look like in practice? For the Iron Sultanate to achieve victory, they would need to break the deadlock at the wall and begin pushing the heretics back. That means leveraging the full extent of their alchemical and mechanical superiority, as the alchemists in Trench Crusade are pretty powerful, as the Codex itself states. An alchemist that has passed all 3 trials is formidable indeed. A master of esoteric powers, able to control fire and ice, metal and liquid, capable of creating intricate mechanical devices and artificial life as well as weapons of calamitous potency. So if the Iron Sultanate could fully unleash their potential and push beyond their current limits, they could develop an entirely new class of weapons, constructs, and maybe even substances that are capable of permanently killing demons. Something similar to, say, a giant sentinel like the ones we see from Warhammer 3. You know, the giant sentinels of Grand Cathay. Take some notes, alchemists, take some notes. These fellas are pretty damn good. They work wonders against ratmen and demons, trust me. Maybe they could even create weapons that distort time and space, as alchemists are also said to be able to manipulate the fabric of reality. It's even possible that perhaps the House of Wisdom could even expand the Iron Wall, cleansing demonic corruption and creating new safe zones. With new innovations like this, an alliance with the Christian nations, and due to the constant infighting of the heretics, they might be able to pave a new way forward and reach their supposed endgame. Unlike New Antioch though, which might expand outwards and reclaim the world, the Iron Sultanate's victory conditions are far more focused on breaking the siege of the Iron Wall, since if Hell's pressure weakens enough, the Sultanate has the potential to enter a new golden era. With alchemy potentially reaching a greater height, they could prolong their citizens' lives, study the furthest reaches of the divine, and maybe even begin to tinker with humanity itself to reach a new powerful form. Now you're probably asking yourself, why Cal, why doesn't the Iron Sultanate also want to expand like New Antioch? Well folks, the Iron Wall is seen as a divine miracle, and it's very unlikely they would ever abandon it for a large-scale expansion. I could see them wanting to retake Mecca or other holy Islamic sites, but the Iron Wall itself is its own miracle now. And to be honest, it's probably a lot more important than Mecca at this current moment in the lore of Trench Crusade. Even in victory, they would likely remain behind its protection, perhaps aiding in sealing Hell's gates, but never straying far from the bastion that ensured their survival. Now I will say, since someone will definitely comment this, wait Cow, this sounds so similar to New Antioch. Well yes, I will admit, the Iron Sultanate and New Antioch share very similar endgames. Both ultimately want the defeat of Hell and the preservation of humanity. The difference is how they get there. New Antioch must go all out and win the war, while the Iron Sultanate can win by simply not losing, since once again, they have a giant fucking wall. And honestly, that's just the way the cookie crumbles. Same destination, completely different roads. In the aftermath of Hell's defeat, if the armies of the faithful did indeed emerge victorious, the Sultanate's focus would likely shift. Alchemy can move beyond warfare, towards curing things like the Black Grail, or uncovering deeper divine truths, as I discussed earlier. Maybe bringing humanity closer to godhood. But just like with New Antioch, peace would not last. Two civilizations forged in endless siege, built for survival and conflict, aren't suddenly going to stand down, especially with the history Christianity and Islam has in the Holy Lands. Eventually tensions would rise and a new war would take shape. If we're talking the probability of the Iron Sultanate actually achieving victory, it actually has one of the more stable survival outlooks in the setting, but that stability does not translate into a high chance of total victory. Their greatest strength is also their greatest limitation, the Iron Wall. As long as it stands, they endure, but true victory depends on something outside of their control, the weakening or collapse of Hell's armies. And nothing in this setting guarantees that. Unlike factions that might force a decisive outcome, the Iron Sultanate is built to last, not to expand. Their most realistic outcome is a long-term containment and survival behind the wall, not the permanent defeat of Hell. Even in a best-case scenario where the siege finally breaks, the world that follows would not be peaceful. It would just be another phase of war waiting to begin. Now we come to my personal favorite faction, by far and away the most dripped out among the faithful, the Trench Pilgrims. This faction is made up of men and women who are touched by heaven. But no, not in that way. They are granted visions and dreams from God, instructing them to destroy heretics and the servants of hell. And so they take up the sword to destroy the enemies of heaven, hoping to atone by dragging the servants of hell into the afterlife with them. They are not a unified army though, and they are not formally sanctioned in any meaningful way. But they are always in the thick of the fighting, armed with whatever they can find. From rusted muskets to improvised explosives, they march willingly into the front lines of Hell's forces, driven by faith, guilt, and absolute conviction. Unlike New Antioch or the Iron Sultanate, the Trench Pilgrims are not defined by structure, territory, or survival. They're defined by their purpose. Their goal is not to hold the line, and it is not to defend the world, but to destroy every heretic, every demon, and every follower of hell they can reach. They are pretty much like the orcs of Trench Crusade, but instead of yelling WAG, they like to yell Jesus Christ. So if New Antioch is a fortress and the Iron Sultanate is a giant-ass wall, then the Trench Pilgrims are a homeless man swinging a hoe at you because the big man in the sky told him to.
領域展開福間水す
And let me tell you folks, they are very effective to say the least. Because there are just so many of them. The armies of hell may kill thousands of them, but there are a million more well on the way.
200,000 units are ready, with 1 million more well on the way.
Their style of fighting is chaotic and suicidal. Guided by visions, they flood no man's land in endless waves. Most die before ever reaching enemy lines, many die upon contact with them, but those who survive fight with a level of fanaticism that borders on the inhuman. Some are marked as stigmatic nuns, warriors whose wounds mirror the suffering of the divine, growing stronger with every injury they endure. Others return from death as martyr penitents, resurrected back into the same war they died in, stripped of pain and hesitation. And then there are the shrine anchorites, towering living altars of war, their pilots enduring constant agony while crushing anything in their path. Hell, there are even pilgrims attached directly to their arms, which, as I addressed in the last video, is one of the coolest and most metal things I've seen in my KO life. But what separates the Trench Pilgrims from the other factions is that these so-called homeless faithful do not believe the war should necessarily end. Sure, it would be great if the armies of hell could be defeated, but that's not exactly what the Trench Pilgrims want. So theoretically, what would happen if the heretic lines collapsed? If hell is pushed back to its source, if the gate is finally reached? Well, for most factions, that would mean victory. But for the Trench Pilgrims, it would simply be a new front. If hell is driven back to the gate, then the Crusade does not stop at the door. It crosses beyond it. The war becomes inverted, and the Trench Pilgrims would see it as their duty to carry the war into hell itself.
Let's go, in and out, 20 minutes adventure.
Which means it would be a literal reverse invasion, but this time the homeless are taking the fight to the archdevils, a holy incursion into the domain of the enemy. Pretty much, if there are not enough heretics, traitors, or demonic forces left on Earth, then Earth is no longer where the Crusade belongs. Hell is. But how would they accomplish this? Well, for the Trench Pilgrims to ever transition from scattered zealots into something capable of pushing beyond the gate of hell, they would first need a unifying figure. Something like a living saint, similar to Joan of Arc, or an enduring prophetic presence that can anchor their fractured, insane visions into a single direction. As of the current setting, they are guided by countless personal revelations or visions, which makes them unstoppable over the course of a few battles, but incapable of a sustained campaign. That is where a saint or a powerful vision would come in. This would allow the pilgrims to function less like a disordered mob and more like an organized but still fanatical force of faith. Now when I say saint, I don't mean that bum from 40k like Saint Celestine. I mean Joan of Arc, who was able to solo a hegemon, the physical manifestation of Beelzebub, and who may have been as tall as a goddamn mountain. That is the living saint that would have to lead the Trench Pilgrims to victory. However, even this would not be enough on its own. A campaign into hell would require the support and pressure of the other faithful factions, such as New Antioch forcing openings through their combination of knights and technology, and the Iron Sultanate providing constructs and defensive support to keep the front from collapsing. In this scenario, the Pilgrims would become the force that actually breaks the heretic legions and their allies, but only because others make the path possible. But compared to the other factions, the Trench Pilgrims do not need to rely on logistics or silly long-term planning, but on momentum and the continued presence of their guiding saint or vision. So how probable is this to happen? Well, to be honest, the Trench Pilgrims are in one of the best positions to ever actually win, because to them, they are kind of already in their endgame. Since you know their whole mission is to kill as many heretics as possible, and while other factions may measure victory in protecting their cities or people, the Pilgrims measure it in extermination. In addition, since there's so goddamn many of them, they excel in attrition warfare, and they do not require supplies, stability, centralized command, or political cohesion. They are a self-replenishing mob, through belief, guilt, and prophetic recruitment, which makes them nearly impossible to fully eliminate in a prolonged war. I think of all the factions we've discussed so far, the Trench Pilgrims are in the strongest position. Not because they're close to reaching the Gate of Hell or eliminating the antagonist factions once and for all, but because there are so many enemies to kill, so many damned souls to bring before God. Now, would the Trench Pilgrims ever be successful? Would they ever reach the Gate of Hell or destroy the Heretic Legions? Well, probably not. In fact, hell no. Hell is full of extremely powerful demons that can't even pass into our world, including the archdevils of the Court of the Seven-Headed Serpent, who would utterly dominate any human forces unlucky enough to cross into Hell's realm, especially those armed with, rakes, hoes, or a musket they found in their grandfather's closet. Even the Gate of Hell is said to drive those near it mad and can reduce living beings to cinders. As the gate yawns open, the unbearable heat of hell reduces forests to cinders, and the unearthly fumes turn animals into twisted monstrosities that rend each other and themselves in anguish. So they would probably die a miserable death, either before or after entering the portal. But isn't that the whole point? To die for heaven and God anyways? So maybe the Trench Pilgrims have far and away the best shot at truly reaching their endgame, which is to kill as many heretics as possible before going down swinging. The Heretic Legions are the main military force of Hell on Earth, raised from the very people who have abandoned God and bent the knee to the powers of the Inferno. And according to my calculations, if we do the math here, there was around 300 million people in 1090 when the Gate of Hell was opened. So 1/3 of that means 100 million people now serve Hell. Damn, do they have like a buy one get one free discount or something? Sheesh, that's a lot of people deciding to serve literal demons and most likely get tortured for all eternity. But the Heretic Legions themselves are not a single unified army, but a sprawling coalition of infernal-aligned states, cult armies, and damn militias bound together by necessity and worship. Each one serves a different demon or archdevil, which means their goals vary from warband to warband. However, as a collective faction, their goal is simple in principle but endless in practice: to tear down the throne of heaven and establish dominance over all of creation. They seek to accomplish this with a majority of different corrupted units. For example, the core of the Heretic Legions are of course the Heretic Troopers, massed infantry of damned humans, supported by anointed heavy infantry, warriors who have walked so far into Hell's influence that their flesh is permanently burned and reforged into something stronger, allowing them to wear heavy armor and wield weapons far beyond the normal capacity of a human being. Leading them are the Heretic Priests, who wield goetic magic that can alter reality and summon demons. I mean, come on, they even have a headless dude who sings 90s era pop songs that are so horrible that they can shatter the minds of their enemies. At the very tippity top of this faction are the Death Commandos, who are taken from birth and trained and augmented to become nearly invulnerable masters of death. Beyond just simple infantry, the Heretic Legions are reinforced by many other abominations, including warpies made from captured and corrupted creatures that can tear through faithful formations, or artillery witches who can literally chuck bombs at you. So as you can see, the Heretic Legions are kinda built different. So far we've only covered the good guys winning, if you even want to call them the good guys. But now it's time to talk about what would happen if the bad guys of Trench Crusade actually emerge victorious. What would that even look like? Well, it would probably mean the final resistance to Hell's rule has been defeated, which means New Antioch would have to fall along with the Iron Sultanate, whose Great Bastion would have to be broken, and those inside would either have to be annihilated or absorbed. But even that, which is already a tall order, is not the true endgame for the Heretic Legions. Because the Heretic Legions are fighting to bring Hell itself onto Earth, to make Earth essentially into the next Inferno. Their victory condition and endgame is to essentially merge Hell and Earth into a single unified domain. where the distinction between the mortal world and hell ceases to exist. It would truly be hell on earth, all jokes aside. People would become resources, cities would become forges, and the world would pretty much become a shithole. So how would they go about actually doing this? Well, for this to fully succeed, the armies of hell would have to consolidate under a single guiding will. Kind of similar to the Trench Pilgrims. As of the current setting, like I discussed earlier, they are incredibly scattered and disorganized, as each of them serve a different goal or vision. So to correct this, they would need one dominant archdevil asserting absolute control over the infernal court. Or I don't know, something as catastrophic as the Antichrist being born. Yep, I said it, the Antichrist, who would be extremely powerful from a power scaling perspective, maybe even the master of goetic magic, and possibly having the regeneration of someone like Wolverine. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I can't exactly power scale a character that doesn't technically exist. But if the Antichrist was born, he would become the singular focal point of all human damnation. He would unite the armies of hell and drive them to complete their ultimate goal. With such a unifying force, the legions could finally act as a single instrument, rather than competing infernal factions. Their superior numbers, demonic entities, and the backing of goetic magic, they would be far and away the strongest army on Earth, capable of taking the fortified bastions of New Antioch and breaching the iron wall of the Iron Sultanate. From there, they could decimate the world, bringing enough suffering and corruption to God's creations that ultimately the realms of hell and earth would bond together, permanently creating hell on earth.
Well, this sucks.
However, it is crucial to understand what the heretic legions are truly at their core. They are at the end of the day pawns or instruments functioning as the physical extension of the court of the seven-headed serpent, the true rulers of hell. The heretic legions are in essence disposable hands of a far greater machine. But even if the Antichrist was born, even if the armies of hell united, and even if they took New Antioch or the Iron Sultanate, victory is not totally guaranteed. Unlike New Antioch, which seeks to reclaim the Holy Land, or the Iron Sultanate, which only seeks to survive, the heretic legions depend on endless expansion or destruction. If they ever fail to grow, conquer, or raid, they will begin to fracture, even with the Antichrist or some other powerful entity leading them. If they ever stop advancing or conquering, they might begin to collapse due to the varying ideals, goals, and desires of the different warbands under their banner. So the endgame is possible if one could unite the worshippers of hell, but even if this is achieved, the heretic legions would be in a very fragile state. Imagine if the Antichrist was to die in some climatic battle with 3 paladins as New Antioch falls. Damn, that sounds cinematic as hell. Imagine if they put Duel of the Fates over that. Sheesh, I would pay big money for that. But yes, imagine if the Antichrist was to die, then the countless united warbands under his banner would turn against each other and may result in even a favorable situation for the faithful forces, due to, the heretics killing each other.
Stop fucking shooting me! What the fuck is wrong with you?
It was a misinput, calm down!
Realistically, the heretic legions are one of the most likely factions to dominate territory in the long haul, but one of the least likely to ever achieve true final victory, because their existence depends on war continuing indefinitely. Even if they technically win, then all of them would become slaves or thralls to the rulers of hell, probably resulting in a last minute, oh shit, I did not think this through. The Black Grail is quite literally disease, decay, and plague given form. A faction that is centered around rot, released directly by the Lord of Flies, Beelzebub.
You don't want to be like this. This is disgusting. This is awful in every way. If I could kill it, I would. But I legally can't.
An archdevil and lord of hell, he sends a disgusting wave of infernal insects, hell flies, locusts, and scorpions sweeping across the land to consume everything in its path. What follows is a disease, with those who are infected rot, mutate, and collapse into masses of flesh and infection, only to rise again as vessels of the plague, their minds intact, trapped in endless suffering as their bodies spread corruption even further. But this is what makes the Black Grail so deadly, because unlike the heretic legions, who rely on traditional physical conquest, the Black Grail simply does not need strategy, territory, or even coordination. So its endgame is pretty simple. In fact, everything. Literally everything across creation. Every human, every animal, every living organism must become part of the Grail. Forests become biomass, cities become breeding grounds, and entire populations become shambling spreaders of disease. So if the Black Grail succeeds, there is literally no after. There's no rebuilding, no empire, and no new order. The world would become a single rotting ecosystem of infection. The land itself becomes hostile to life, oceans rot, and the air fills with spores, ensuring that any living thing that survives the spread of the Black Grail's infection would ultimately become infected as well, essentially meaning there's nowhere to hide. But let's not forget the hegemon, because at the peak of this process, when enough infected gather in one place, their flesh merges and transforms, and from that emerges the hegemon, the physical manifestation of Beelzebub formed on Earth. Now, since Trench Crusade is a little hard to truly power scale, we don't know exactly how powerful the hegemon are. Two have been destroyed in the past by figures like Joan of Arc and a powerful paladin, so even though they are the physical manifestation of an archdevil, they are not unkillable. But imagine if multiple hegemons began forming simultaneously across the world. Yeah, there would probably be no realistic way to stop them, even if the faithful unleashed every single paladin they had at their disposal. So how would they actually achieve this? And that's kind of the worst part. They already are. Unlike every other faction we've discussed so far, the Black Grail does not need to seal the gates of hell or conquer the faithful. All they need to do is spread the Black Grail disease. And according to lore, there is currently no cure. The scientist priests of the church and the alchemists of the Sultanate fervently look for a way to inoculate their people against this foulest of diseases. But thus far, they are without success. The only answer is to burn the infected settlements with specifically constructed flamethrower tanks that use holy anointing oil as the fuel for their weapons. Which essentially means that the Black Grail has by far the easiest path to victory out of any faction in the current setting of Trench Crusade. It does not need to defeat New Antioch, it does not need to breach the Iron Wall, and it doesn't need to unite like the Heretic Legions. It simply needs time. Time to infect the entire world. I mean, it already has a foothold in Western Europe, as far as France. So realistically speaking, how likely is it that the Black Grail wins? And to be honest, it's uncomfortably high. Because unless a cure is discovered or the spread is somehow contained, which so far has proven impossible, the Black Grail will continue to expand. Slowly at first, and then exponentially. Every loss against it feeds it. Every failure to contain it accelerates the process. And eventually, the tipping point will be reached, where there are simply too many infected, too many plague knights, too many hegemons forming, for any force left on Earth to combat it. At that point, the war is essentially over, and all there is to wait and become one with the Black Grail. Finally, we come to our last antagonist faction, the Court of the Seven-Headed Serpent, who are the big bad of the entire setting. They are the Council of the Archdevils, who rule from the Iron City of Dis, and quite frankly, the literal embodiment of the 7 deadly sins. They are constantly scheming, betraying, and replacing one another in an endless political bloodbath. But unlike the Heretic Legions or the Black Grail, the court orchestrates the entire war. Every invasion, every battle, every atrocity ultimately traces back to their will. And yet, despite this power, they are bound by one critical limitation, the Covenant. Due to this, true demons can't fully manifest on Earth without consequence, meaning the court can't simply walk through the portal of hell and invade Earth. So instead, they play a much longer, much more insidious game. The court's end goal is not just victory in a conventional sense, it is the complete collapse of that very barrier between hell and earth. They want to bypass the covenant entirely by corrupting the world so thoroughly that the distinction between the mortal realm and the inferno stops mattering, so they can finally cross the threshold and rule Earth. So as you can see, the court of the seven-headed serpent kinda piggybacks on the endgame of the heretic legions. While they conquer the world for them and turn it into hell and earth, the court will finally emerge to claim their prize. This means spreading suffering, war, and corruption on a scale so massive that reality begins to warp. At the same time, they aim to sabotage what they perceive as God's plan, by ensuring that as many humans as possible fall and die in rebellion. The more humanity is twisted and broken, the stronger the archdevils become. Pretty much they kinda operate like chaos gods that absorb power from those that suffer, emotionally and physically. They achieve this through methods that often make no sense from a human perspective. Pretty much the court practices what you could basically call metaphysical terrorism. Instead of focusing purely on strategic victories, they will deliberately target moments, people, or places that have long-term spiritual importance. A praetor might ignore a fortress just to slaughter a village because one child there was destined to become a saint. At the same time, they deploy warbands made up of hell knights, sorcerers wielding goetic magic, pit locusts, and enslaved mortals known as the wretched, who are driven into battle as expendable tools. All of these units help complete the court's mysterious objectives, and even their own followers are not safe, as the court will betray or sacrifice them without hesitation if it serves a greater purpose. And this is where the praetors come in, because they're kind of the court's secret weapon. Despite their lowborn status in Hell's hierarchy, praetors are very useful to their masters. As they are partly born as creatures of natural order, they can sneak into the mortal realm without breaking the covenant of hell, which binds each rebel seraphim. Some praetors are great warriors, trained in the esoteric fighting bits of the Iron City of Dis, while others are schooled in the goetic arts and the mighty sorceress Basalt Towers. This makes them very versatile and dangerous opponents, even though they can be slain in combat as a part of their essence is tied to mortal flesh. With weapons like the praetors, Hell seeks to constantly swing the game in their favor, and that leads us directly to their endgame. If the court actually succeeds, it would not look like a traditional victory, where one side wins and the other loses, someone cries, and both sides go home. No, it would look like reality itself is breaking down. The barrier between hell and earth would thin to the point of collapse, allowing true demonic forces to fully manifest. We're not talking about smaller powers like the praetors, but the actual 7 archdevils present on earth. Entire regions would become extensions of the inferno, where the laws of reality are warped by goetic power and sustained suffering. Humanity would be enslaved to exist purely as fuel for hell's power. In a way, this is the most complete victory possible in the setting. Like, how was little Johnny going to go to school or take care of his cat when the literal devils, plural, want to eat him?
I'm in danger!
But there is a catch, thankfully, and it's a big one. The court is its own worst enemy. Their entire system is built on betrayal, ambition, and constant power struggles. The court is almost never stable, with archdevils constantly being overthrown, replaced, or sabotaged by their rivals. Even when they gain ground on Earth, that success often destabilizes the balance of power in hell, leading to even more infighting. The only exception is Mammon, who somehow keeps his seat through mastery of greed and control. But all the other archdevils are in a constant cycle of rise and decline. So in terms of likelihood, the court is paradoxical. On one hand, they are absolutely one of the most powerful factions in the entire setting. Their strategy directly attacks the foundations of reality, and over time, that naturally pushes things in their favor. But on the other hand, their inability to operate consistently makes total victory extremely unlikely. They are powerful enough to doom the world, but too divided to fully control it. If we're talking realistically, the court's most likely victory is a slow, irreversible degradation of reality where hell gains more and more influence over time, but never quite achieves total domination, because the moment they get close, they'll probably stab each other in the back and set themselves back again. So that's going to do it for today's video. Just to wrap things up in a nice little cow-sized ribbon, the most likely faction to emerge victorious in Trench Crusade is the Black Grail. Because of its infection, it spreads, mutates, and persists in ways that don't really care about borders, logistics, or even traditional warfare. It's the kind of force that doesn't really need to win to eventually absorb everything in creation. And on the other end of the spectrum, the least likely to achieve any true unified victory is the court of the Seven-Headed Serpent. Not because they lack power or armies, but because they can't stop sabotaging each other. They are literally like a Tom and Jerry cartoon, as if even one archdevil manages to secure a massive advantage, another will almost certainly tear it down. So even Hell's top level is locked in a constant state of internal self-destruction, which makes total victory across the board basically impossible. And that kind of sums up the entire setting. Nobody is stable, nobody is unified, and even the factions that look like they're currently winning are an inch away from losing it all. So yeah, that's where I'm going to leave it in today's video. If you enjoyed it, consider liking and subscribing to A Falling Cow. I'll probably keep returning to Trench Crusade every now and again. I just really hope they release some more lore so I can truly power scale the setting. Shout out my Patreon and YouTube members: Impossy Paul, Tyler Pick 7, Musty, Keedry, Seth Capizilla, Lag, Cunning Karkle, Caleb White, Dinkleberry, Omar, Altrazon 27, and Michael Skipper 7277. You guys are the best, and I can't thank you enough. Also, shout out my editor. You are doing a fabulous job, my guy, and I appreciate you so goddamn much. Everyone in the comments, drop some love to my awesome editor. As always, my beloved herd, stay milked, and I'll see you all real soon.